We're dealing with, and I think it's already up here, I like this little gadget. I don't think I've used it here before. Hopefully it won't make anything blow up or anything, but PowerPoint I think does help. I think it's a nice additive. A lot of times when I've taught here, I've used PowerPoint in some other venues, you might say, but I really haven't used it much, if at all, here teaching classes, and I like it. It helps to kind of sometimes get the teacher back on track, and then glance back up and oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be talking about this other subject, we're on this subject. So immodesty, we're going to have a 2-week study on this, so we'll talk about it tonight and then next week. Next week will be, as Mr. Rogers put it, a little broader, you might say, look at modesty or immodesty. But tonight, it's mainly about what you're wearing. And I did try to make sure I looked, so I had a t-shirt on. I said, well, let me put a little jacket on that just in case, I don't want to be hypocritical up here. Not that I think women are just falling out all over the place when I wear a t-shirt, but I'm just saying, let's be consistent here, right? So in any event, let's look into this here a little bit and see what we can learn from it. Interestingly, the study, you might say, this lesson starts off looking at dress code. Mr. Rogers puts up a dress code from the state of Ohio. Now, I figured this would work pretty well in this venue, right? Although a lot of you already know this from whatever the state of Florida visitation rules are in prisons. I've never served time in prison, but I have actually been, how many have actually been inside a prison? How many have been inside a prison? So a goodly number in this room have been in a prison. The times I've gone in, when I was a prosecutor up in Baker County, there were 1 or 2 crimes that occurred involving an inmate and a prison correctional officer. And I remember going and looking at the scene of what had happened, actually being in the cell. And I got a little bit worried because actually this particular incident involved someone being handcuffed, right? And they handcuffed me. And so I got a real good view of what it was like for the defendant in that case, and what happened next, et cetera, et cetera. But I've been to a few different prisons. I've never really visited anyone in prison. I've never actually gone there and sat down, and however, I've not visited, but I've been in prisons a few times. But the point of this is this. There's dress codes, right? There are definite dress codes, and you can imagine why, right? I mean, I can imagine a lot of people, they're not used to coming to church and stuff, and maybe don't even think about this. If they were sitting out here right now, they'd say, well, of course there are dress codes in a prison, right? I mean, you're going in there with people that may have been put away for all kinds of sexual offenses. Men or women, in the case of women, have been in there for sometimes years, decades, and no contact with the opposite sex. And that sort of, yes, I can see why you would want to do that. But I think we'll look up here. Notice what it says, though. This is for the order, safety, and security of everybody involved. Now, again, when you're going to school, you're going to the mall, going to the beach, the odds that it's going to be a true matter of danger of actually being attacked, pretty low. But there's a thread here that I think we can learn from this. Let's move on, though, and see what else we can find here. Let's see what some specifics are. Gotta have your proper undergarments on, right? Okay. I don't think this is a big problem at church. I don't think people come in violating that too much, right? Yeah, we don't want that. Unfortunately, that's become pretty common in some places. But I remember back in the late 80s, for some reason, it became fashionable it was mainly young men, I was one of them, where, you would wear, not to get too graphic here, but you wear your regular underwear, but then the boxer shorts. People started wearing boxer shorts like they were shorts. And so instead of wearing just regular athletic shorts or something like that, you would actually just wear your boxers now over some briefs. But that was actually a thing. Does anyone remember that? By the way, a few people from the 80s remember that. That was a thing. It did disappear pretty much. That's probably good. But this, of course, living in Florida, right? I mean, you don't even have to go to the beach. You can see a lot of these kinds of things, some of these are like automatic. People say, oh, of course. But other ones, maybe not so automatic to our minds. You know what I'm saying? When you're accustomed to being in and out in the world, what is acceptable to God? We're going to look at that, of course. Let's look a little bit more at it here. Sleeveless clothing. Of course, halter tops, tank tops, low cut, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, yeah, these are things that most of us would realize why this is. Notice though that dresses even, basically you got to keep it down to the knee. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to be, or at least the middle of the knee. You're not going to be wearing something real short here. These things are not allowed either. Let's move on. Clothing with holes and rips. That has re-emerged, right?
Yes.
That's a style, right? It definitely is a style. And I'll be honest with you, usually the holes in these jeans and stuff, they're not down here, you know what I'm saying? There are some other places, right, that are a little more, what did I just see? You know what I'm saying? That's a reality. That's a reality. Move on here, see if we can find. Oh, now this is something. What has been in vogue for now, maybe the last 5-10 years, that women especially like to wear out and about these days a lot? Yoga pants, right? So, I mean, don't go to prison wearing yoga pants. They're not going to let you in with your yoga pants on, right? All right, but here's where we get into the matter for. We can see that and we understand why. And again, some might say, well, yes, of course, these are people that are in a situation, a special situation. But when we talk about the idea that wearing immodest clothing could be dangerous in prison, well, there's some danger outside of prison. And I'm not talking about just somebody attacking you, following you home, and doing something to you. But there's a moral danger. There is a moral danger, not only to ourselves, the people that might be dressing immodestly, I'm not saying me personally, but someone, or those who are observing this, who are seeing it. I'll ask this before we go on here, and this is mainly for the men here. Let's be honest. Men tend to be more visually oriented, right? We notice things visually more. Women, and this is not 100% true, but oftentimes, I think it's pretty. I've seen it play out in my own life. This is probably true. That women tend to be more, involved with feelings, how somebody treats them. They're not necessarily all visual. Men are very visual creatures, are we not? We are. Okay? And just ask yourself, now how many times have you been driving along in a car or something, and maybe in Gainesville especially, the abundance of the University of Florida, right? And now if it's cold weather and a girl comes jogging by in long, sweats, all covered up. But what about when it's, let's say 10 months out of the year, maybe more, and they've got some little skimpy little jogging outfit on? How many men, if they're really honest, their head is just on a swivel? I'm sorry, but that is true, all right, for most men. That's a battle. That's every man's battle, some might call it. But in any event, let's look deeper into though, not just, again, worried about getting attacked, but why is it a problem if somebody is dressing in an inappropriate way, immodest way? Well, as Mr. Rogers put on the slide here, immodest dress is rebellion against God. Let's go to Genesis. And I'm not going to ask us all to read from it specifically. I got them right here in the outline. But there's some things we want to look at here and see, because this is the question. This is the question. Do we, as I think a lot of people just kind of assume, do we have a wide latitude as Christians in how we dress? Yes, or certainly don't come into church service wearing a bikini. Okay, done. But on some of these more marginal things, do we have the latitude? Is it purely a matter of Christian or personal liberty? Or has God kind of given us some instructions on what proper dress is? And what really it comes down to is, what do we need to cover up, right? What do we need to cover up? And I'll admit, when you look at it, and I was looking through this and studying through this lesson, in some ways it is, and maybe I've been out in the world too much myself, but it is a little jarring when you think about, that far? We have to be that worried about that and that? Well, let's look at it. Before sin entered the world, Adam and Eve, they were naked and unashamed. You can find that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. But when they sinned, their eyes were open and they realized they were naked. And in Genesis 3, verse 7, they decided they needed to cover themselves. And so what did they do? Somebody just tell me what they did when they realized they were naked and they needed to cover themselves up. What did they do?
Fig leaves.
Fig leaves, okay. In fact, I think there's a company out there now that makes, of all things, medical cover-ups, like what nurses wear when they're on duty, or doctors will wear when they go to an operation or something. And I think it's called Figs is the name of the company or something. And that's, I'm assuming, where they got that from. So it's kind of, in fact, I actually owned some of their stock at one time, I think, but I don't even own it anymore. It turned bad, you know, but no, I'm kidding. But let's move on here. But let's see what they did. When they sewed these fig leaves together, what they did is they made coverings for themselves. We consider these, from the word that was used, it would be like an apron or a covering or a loin covering. I think the Hebrew word, according to Mr. Rogers here, and I'm sure Brian knows this already, maybe Chris, I'm sure, where's Chris? I'm sure he knows too. The Hebrew word is shagaur, which refers to a girdle or an apron. The bottom line is this: when Adam and Eve realized that they had sinned, and I don't know if they realized they sinned, but they sinned and they realized they were naked. They'd done wrong and they were naked and they recognized it. They wanted to cover themselves up. They weren't covering their whole bodies, right? Basically just covering down there. And it's interesting because a lot of times when you think of what does it mean to be naked, right? What does naked mean? You know, and admittedly, with men, I think most men, if you just brought people off the street and said, hey, if a man's wearing, say, a swimsuit, and it's not even Speedos, okay, let's just say regular swimsuit, and he's not wearing a shirt, is he naked? Well, most people say, nah, but the Bible seems to indicate something different. Certainly with women. I think even the most liberal thinking person in the world would agree, yeah, that's, you're at least half naked, right? But it's interesting because, let's go down here in verse 10. This is after they'd made the fig leaves and all that, sewn together, the coverings. And Adam admitted that he was naked. He recognized he was still naked. He had this down here covered up, but he recognized he was still naked. So that's instructive. You know what I'm saying? That's instructive to me and I think to other people. In any event, before they left, they were driven out of the garden, God made them, this is Genesis 3, verse 21. He made tunics of skin and clothed them. And a tunic, what is a tunic? We hear that term, we don't use it a lot, I think most of us, but what is a tunic? The Hebrew word here that was used in Genesis 3:21 is kethoneth, and it refers to a long shirt-like garment. Now, one, I guess this gentleman's name is Wenham, one scholar, you might say, he wrote, this is a tunic, the basic outer garment worn next to the skin. It was a long shirt reaching the knees or ankles. Ankles would be real low, right? And then another gentleman by the name of Gresham says that it was a tunic that was worn next to a person's body, often with long or half sleeves and reaching to the knees or ankles. So, well, was it knees? Was it ankles? What do we have to cover up? And at the end of this section, you might say, Mr. Rogers, the author of the outline, he says the bottom line is this: they were at least covered from their shoulders to their knees, with the tunic on, right? And that's and again, that's rather instructive. And this is what Mr. Rogers would say. Did I say Roger? Yeah, Mr. Rogers on TV even. No, he would say it too, I'm sure. He always wore a sweater, didn't he, when he came home, right? But in any event, basically that's what God wants us to cover. Now, again, you think about it, from your shoulders, not necessarily all the way down your arm, but let's say halfway down your arm at least, to the elbows to the knees. That's a pretty, that's a lot covered up, isn't it? Now, again, I'm not going to get into tonight like a big theological discussion about, could you differ about, are you sinning if you ever go out to Disney World or something and you show a little bit above your knee? I mean, I'm going to deal with general principles tonight and let his, outline stand for itself and the Word of God stand for itself. But what I think it is saying for sure is I think a lot of us probably do need to kind of say, well, wait, I need to maybe examine this a little bit more closely. Admittedly, a guy my age, and a lot of us in here, we're not out wearing things that are typically very immodest just because we're slobs, a lot of us. We don't, it's not an issue. we probably need to be looking at maybe dressing more nicely, yes, and stuff like that. But I think when we're dealing with our children especially, and young people, but even older people, and I definitely don't want to lay it all on women either, but admittedly, there does seem to be a bit of a larger burden for them in that respect. There is certainly more of a societal pressure, is there not, for women to look a certain way, to kind of conform to a certain thing. Most guys, really, honestly, there are exceptions, but most guys are not real big on fashion anyway, so they're going to wear what's comfortable, which sometimes could be a problem. Yes, you have a question?
A lot of people misunderstand naked and nude. They're not the same.
Oh, I didn't know there was a difference.
Nude is naked is body exposed. Nude is being totally.
Okay, so it's a degree of nudity, basically, or nakedness or whatnot. That's interesting. I'd not really ever thought of it that way, actually.
Ray,
yes.
What did he say? Naked is being enclosed and nude is what?
He's saying that, if I heard him right, nude is being completely naked, not a shred of clothing on you at all. Naked is you could be partially clothed, but you're not fully clothed. Which, again, that was looking at Adam and Eve after they had put the fig leaves on. They would have been considered naked, not necessarily nude. But with respect to what God wants us to do, it isn't an issue, are you totally nude, of course. I mean, it's a matter of, we're looking more at naked than nude in this context. Never mind, I just want to say something. All right, let's move on here. Let's go on to, and it says, immodesty or immodest dress reveals nudity. Again, looking at Genesis 3 there, you don't have to be completely nude to be considered naked, especially in God's eyes. So let's look at this a little more carefully here. Let's look actually at the body parts. We'll look at the body parts here, right? This is not an added, oh yeah, sorry. You can tell I'm not used to, wow, I'm way back, all right. Wait, I'm going backwards. Sorry. Let's move forward here. Oh yeah, I'm way behind. There's a tunic. Yeah, goodness, this would have been a lot more helpful, wouldn't it, if I kept doing it. Okay, here we are. Thanks for letting me get caught up here. The thigh, okay? Now again, I think of, this is me personally speaking, just my thoughts. I think of, how much of the thigh needs to be covered, I mean, most people, when they wear shorts, some of the thigh is being shown, although a lot of people like wearing long down to the knees shorts these days. But let's look at this more carefully here. From Exodus chapter 28, verse 42. And this was God giving instruction as to how the clothing for the priests should be in the Old Testament. It says, "And you shall make for them linen trousers to cover their nakedness. They shall reach from the waist to the thighs." And that's interesting, instructive. Also in prophesying against Babylon, Mr. Rogers points out, God said, this is from Isaiah chapter 47, if you want to follow along, Isaiah chapter 47, verses 2 and 3. "Take the millstones and grind meal. Remove your veil, take off the skirt, uncover the thigh, pass through the rivers, your nakedness shall be uncovered. Yes, your shame will be seen." Again, interesting, instructive here. So, and this is what Mr. Roger I'm going to stop using his name so much, I'm like, parroting him constantly here. But this is some things that are pointed out in the outline that could be potentially exposing the thigh. Again, something to think about here. Short shorts, spandex or leggings. So I guess the idea there is that even if you actually have some fabric over certain body parts, right? Just because you have fat, I think Brian used last week in talking about in his lesson about ballet dancers, right? And I think you said, men, you're automatically lewd or something if you're wearing, because, I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but just, people have watched ballets, you know what I'm saying? And I think what Brian was referring to. So even if you have some clothing on you in some of these body parts, there is a question there of, are you exposing your nakedness nevertheless here? Let me see if there's any other here thing. Any other things? Well, this is one that, admittedly, it's kind of tough. Cheerleading uniforms, gymnastics outfits, You know, we're getting ready to put Emma in gymnastics. I remember she did tumbling. Now she's going to try some, you know, I mean, admittedly, you know, it takes a little because you're just very accustomed to, well, gymnastics, little girls doing their thing, you know, I mean, but these are things that I think we have to reckon with, you know what I'm saying? Again, I'm not going to stand and say I'm the authority on it. I'm letting it be known, and we'll see what, you know, Scripture says as we go along and stuff, but again, something to at least consider and think about, you know, how do we conduct ourselves? How do our children conduct themselves? Let's move on to, I guess you'd call these the big three. We've talked about the thigh, the buttocks, okay, the buttocks. You know, I mean, admittedly, okay, bare buttocks and anybody's, sorry. I'm just not used to this gadget. I'm going to get there. No, look, nobody's going to doubt. You walk down, and I don't care if you got your front covered or not. You walk down Main Street here, and you're showing your complete hiney. You are going to be run out of here on a rail. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to, that will count as naked, no doubt. But how about when you go to the beach? This is the weird thing. I got to admit, this is kind of a weird thing. Well, let's go on to let's finish the big three here. Well, that's a bad, almost a pun there, but the breast, all right, the breast. Again, without saying, but what's interesting, you know, in the outline, the author says, look, that goes for men as well as women. You know. Now, to me, admittedly, my natural whatever thoughts on it are like, now there's a difference between those two things. Okay, I mean seriously, but I understand where he's coming from, and I will say this. Do I think that, is it outside the box of my understanding that someone could find, I'll say a lady, could find a man bare-chested walking down the street? Brad Pitt comes walking down Main Street like Butler without a shirt on. Are there girls that are probably thinking bad thoughts about him? Probably so, right? Now, if he had the t-shirt on, it may not make any difference for him, but for most people it might, you know what I'm saying? So that's interesting. That is interesting. But we look at, here's some things with the buttocks, though. Swimsuits. See, it is interesting. You know, and again, some men do wear Speedos, but most of us don't. But especially a young lady would never dream of showing up somewhere in her underwear, usually, you know what I'm saying? The bra, the panties, whatever. And yet, if you're at the beach and it looks more like a bathing suit, it could be just as skimpy. Now, I guarantee you the men notice. They're like, oh, I'm loving this fact that there's no taboo about wearing bikinis at the beach. Even if they don't say it out loud, that's what most men are thinking, I'll be honest with you. They shouldn't, and we need to work on that, all of us. We'll have we may have a special segment on men and bad thoughts and stuff, but isn't that interesting, though, how our society, because no doubt, in the time of our grandparents, right, there was not, you know, you didn't wear bikinis. And my grandparents, some of you young enough, well, yeah, probably they did, but my grandparents, they weren't wearing bikinis, okay? And they sure weren't walking around in their underwear. But now it's, you know, and for a long time, it's quite different. I mean, where I grew up in Brevard County, there was Playa Linda Beach near Titusville. And it was it's a national park, national seashore, where there was an area that was well known as a nudist beach. You could go there and just whatever, you know, and so, in fact, I think one time when I lived in Pensacola area, I went to the beach out there, and it was a national seashore. And I'm trying not to remember all the details, but I remember walking out on the beach, and it was almost a deserted area. And if I remember, I looked over, and I was like, and there was, I think it was a man down there naked. I was like, okay, we're back in Playa Linda, I guess here. But in any event, but you know, again. And it's not just with the again, I hate to zero in, especially as a man, this will make me seem very sexist, I'm sure, but, you know, when you talk about the breasts, you know, let's also be honest that even when the breasts aren't completely exposed, which they hardly ever are, right? But, you know, you could be wearing a really nice dress, and yet you may not be entirely modest with that, you know what I'm saying? And again, the men, I hate to say it, men's eyes will tell you the truth, right? If you want to know whether you're wearing something modest or immodest, just note the man's eyes that you walk by. They will tell you. You'll find out pretty quickly what the deal is on that. Well, let's move on. Let's move on here. Let's go to something else here as we move on. Shame and nakedness, right?
Do you want me to?
No. Yeah, why not? This is a training wheel thing tonight, right? Because this is driving him crazy. I mean, I'm just going way on beyond here, right? Give me one thing to do. Maybe next week I can master this as well. All right?
I have a question.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so, like concealed carry, imprinting is not, it's a bad thing to do. No, it's legal, it's bad to do, imprinting a firearm.
No, what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said exactly.
Concealed carry and.
Oh, yes, okay.
Imprinting is a bad thing to do even though it's legal. Okay, same thing with clothes, even though it's covering, imprinting would be considered bad as well.
Where you can see it, in other words.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about the dresses. Yeah, exactly. And then the fabric and stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, and a lot of these, what we're proclaiming here, I mean, again, the Bible says what it says. Nobody can debate what it says. Now, I imagine people on the periphery of some of these things might say, well, you know, I'm not going there with it so much, but I'm saying these are things that we need to think about and perhaps pray about as well. And again, it's especially helpful, I think, in bringing up children and stuff and training them where they should go, young people and stuff like that. Let's go to Revelation chapter 3. This is going to deal with a shame and nakedness and whatnot. Let's go to chapter 3, and we're going to look at verse 18. Revelation chapter 3, verse 18. And it says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich, and white garments, that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. In the outline here, the author definitely wants to point out here that for him, he seems like that a lot of Christians now, that we've lost our sense of shame a little bit, you know. Things that would make us, we don't know how to blush. Let's go to another one. Let's go to Jeremiah, and we'll look at chapter 6, verse 15. Jeremiah, Old Testament, chapter 6, verse 15. By the way, I'm glad to have you all back with us tonight. I love the news that I heard about you, Judy, and everything with your everything. We're very happy, and I'm glad to see your companion here as well. All right, let's go to fiance. Somebody whispered. Okay, fiance, excellent. All right, 6:15. It says, "Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? No, they were not all ashamed, nor did they know how to blush. Therefore they shall fall among those who fall. At the time I punish them, they shall be cast down, says the Lord. They did not know how to blush." In this day and age, and we're probably way past this in reality, it's probably a long time ago this was true in the United States or the world. But it does seem like, what does it take for anyone to blush now? You know what I'm saying? Or be ashamed of anything. There's no doubt about it. And especially if you tried to implement with I'm fortunate right now. I've got a 6-year-old, soon to be 7-year-old daughter. I don't have a 16, soon to be 17-year-old daughter, right? I'm sure there's people sitting right now, you don't know nothing right now. You know nothing about the struggle that you're going to be encountering here in a few years when it comes to what to wear, right? Because I'll be honest with you, if you try to essentially cover from the shoulders down to the elbow, here down to the knee, in all circumstances out in public or whatnot, people are going to think you're pretty weird. A lot of people are going to think you're pretty weird, and that you know. Now, some cases that may not be so, but in many but it is what it is, as they say. Let's move on here. We've talked about here how there's a concern about the lack of shame, but let's look also about what messages are being sent. Messages that are being sent. I'm not going to quote it exactly from 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 10, but there's a type of clothing that sends the message that you want to be a godly person, that you are promoting godliness, right? You know what's interesting? And I know we have some people in this community, Union County, that fit this description. There's a religious group in this county, and the men the men wear beards a lot and jeans. I notice they, for whatever reason, wear jeans a lot. But the women, what do you know about the women? What kind of outfits do they tend to wear? No matter where they're at, what they're doing. Somebody describe what you see them wearing.
Ankle, from wrist to ankle.
Very covered up almost, they're the kind of dresses that stand out immediately, right? It's like, because nobody wears dresses like that, right? Especially in Florida. Sorry?
It's called a cape dress.
Okay, well, and can you speak authoritatively a little bit about that, or?
Well, my kids go to school and I know all of them, so.
Right. You know, and I admire.
Just be clear, I'm not mad at night.
Okay, that's right. That's fine. Even if you were, I wouldn't be upset with you in any way. No, but yes, that sticks out. They tend to be a little. I hate to use this term, but this is what people probably think when they see somebody wearing a dress like that. What do people think a lot of times? A little bit frumpy, right? A little bit frumpy. But that's because I think we've become so accustomed. They're probably the same dresses that, 50, 60, not 50, I'm thinking 60s, sorry, go beyond that. 70, 80 years ago, well, that's just what people wore when you went out. It's no, that's what you wore. But now, if you're covered up and not whatever, you look like, you're frumpy or whatever. People like me think that in mind. They're frumpy, but they may be more godly, right? That's the thing. We got to reckon with that, I mean, it's so I admire that. I admire that. Again, I think it is more of a challenge for women because, again, the men that are a part of that body there, they really, you wouldn't really know whether they were something different than the normal person. They're wearing jeans, whatever. They sometimes have a beard. That's about it. But the women definitely look different, and it's so ingrained now. I mean, it's been years since I've watched a Hollywood awards show, like when I was a kid or something. Honestly, I can imagine. I've seen clips here and there of it. I can imagine what the red carpet looks like these days, right? Almost to a level of preposterous, just unbelievable. No shame, nothing at all. It's crazy. But again, what we're looking at here tonight is, and as we go forward, what do we do? You know what I'm saying? You can't help what all these other people are doing, except maybe be an influence where you can. But the question really is, do we go more in that direction, or do we look for ways where we can distinguish ourselves? And again, the bottom line is, and this is what each soul has to reckon with, is how is God going to judge this activity? What am I doing here that's right or wrong? Let's go on to another Old Testament, or actually go to the Old Testament, Proverbs, chapter 7, verse 10. And Solomon there is speaking of the attire of a harlot, right? Of a harlot. And admittedly, and that type of clothing it's clothing that entices. And I'll be honest with you, some people might even go so far as to say, and this is one, and I didn't know if I even wanted to mention this because it's controversial and it could be unnecessarily antagonizing and stuff. Some people would say, well, this woman got attacked because she was wearing something. No, any civilized human being is not going to attack another person just because they're wearing skimpy clothes, okay? No civilized human is going to do that. Unfortunately, there are uncivilized humans among us, though. That is a fact. And again, we're not so much worried about whether we're going to get attacked or not. I mean, there are some places you better worry about that a little bit. If you go to prison, that's one. You're not going to get in if you're not. I don't know, any prison people here that have any, well, we'll get that. Tell me after our service tonight, I want to hear a story, too, about somebody came outrageously dressed and you had to turn around and say, go back to the parking lot. Because I think it's set up there on the thing, or maybe it was just in my listing of it, is always bring a change of clothing in case they send you back and you got to wear something a little more conservative than you even thought you had to wear, which is kind of funny here. But again, what message are you sending? Now I'll admit, I'm not delusional enough to think that just because some pretty co-ed from the University of Florida walks by me in Gainesville, that she's wearing that for me. You know what I'm saying? That she's hoping to entice this 50-something-year-old guy. No, they're not, okay? I'm not delusional. Yes, 30 years ago I would have thought that, but not now, okay? But nevertheless, what message are you sending? You got to think about what. Now here, let's go on because we don't have much time here.
The message is look at me.
Yeah, there is maybe a little bit of a narcissism about it, someone could say. But again, it's so widespread now. The tide is so strong that even just your average person, young person especially, there's a lot of, if you don't, again, how many people down at Union County High School want to be thought of as the frumpy girl? You know what I'm saying? Most high schoolers don't even know what frumpy is probably, but they don't want to be frumpy like that. In fact, they want to be on that. They want to look, whatever. I mean, and
They don't want to look different.
right, the standing apart is different. Although some seem to be very willing to go on the edge in the other direction, right? You know what I'm saying? Oh, okay, I'm wearing a bikini to school today, you know. But I'm sure that was tried in the 70s, so you're way late on that. But let's go on to a few more things here. This is another issue, and will be about the last of here as we finish up, is we got to also be concerned about being a stumbling block. You know, we have some responsibility. For example, you know, David lusted after Bathsheba, you know, and he had responsibility for what he did, right? I mean, he can't say, oh, it was totally her fault. No. You know, we and again, I'm kind of referring to the men a lot of times here, but whomever's on that other side. But also whoever's wearing those outfits that maybe not be so modest. Do consider what effect are you having on somebody else. And again, the danger that I'm thinking about, I think in the I don't know if you used it up here in the slides I've been ignoring for the last 5 minutes, but he used the term danger. And again, I'm not so much worried about the danger from a physical standpoint, but the danger from a moral standpoint. And are you leading somebody you know, astray? And I'll just say this, as a man, you know, as a man, we men, we are weak, okay? We are weak. We have trouble with lust in our lives, most of us, okay? Anyone who says they don't, they're lying, okay, if they're a man. I think women, some do, but I don't think it's nearly as much. I believe there's a difference there. Sorry, I do believe that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist with women, but for men, it's a big struggle. And so, you know, not only do we as men need to try to avert our eyes, whatever we have to do, but women, help us out and don't, I'm not saying it happens here anyway, but I'm saying just broadly speaking here. We don't want to be accused or guilty of causing someone else to stumble. In the conclusion here, as we wrap up here with about a minute or two left, you know, why can the prison, which is way back there, you know, they have a right, don't they, to tell people how they should dress when they come to their facility, right? They have a right to do that because it's their facility. They're in charge of it. It's the states or federal governments, whatever, but they're in charge of administering it. And they're doing it for the safety, the order, and everything needs to be done. But think about our own bodies. God made us. He designed us, created us, and he has a right, as he's done in his word, to tell us how we should dress, to tell us what we should cover up. All right? So, again, I'm not saying I'm the authority on this at all. We've gone through some verses. We've talked about some principles here from Scripture. Just something to think about. Next week, we're going to continue to talk about immodesty, but it's going to be a broader view of it. And I will give I will give you a little teaser, you might say, for next week. I did notice in the outline that Mr. Rogers does deal with the issue of tattoos in pretty in-depth. So actually, in this day and age, that's going to be a very interesting subject, I think, the issue or subject of tattoos. We'll talk about that next week, among other things. I appreciate your help. Thank you, Brian, for save me there.
Evan has one to do.
He's got one. Good.
I think it's number 8.
Number 8, the big or little? All right, okay. Tentatively, number 8 in the little book. Number 8 in the little book, tentatively. Are you washed in the blood? Yep. It's a good invitation song. Number 8, are you washed in the blood? Come on in. Who were you trying to make vomit? Okay, quit talking about vomit and go sit down. Number 8, blue book. Okay. All right. All right, so it is number 8 in the little book. Are you washed in the blood? Are you washed in the blood? Be led in that by young Mr. Evan. All right. We have Fifth Sunday potluck coming up. Do we have anything coming up with the youth in the next week or so, Tyler, that we need to be mindful of? Okay. All right. Give me my phone. Thank you.
Right.
No. What? Yes, ma'am.
You think not like, is it Sunday or next Sunday?
Sunday.
29th. Fifth Sunday.
Yeah, that's the
Fifth.
Sunday,
Fifth Sunday.
the 29th.
Yeah, I said in the next week or two about Tyler, and then I said we got Fifth Sunday potluck coming up. So it probably ran together and sounded like I said next Sunday we have potluck.
This
This Sunday.
Look, if you don't have a red flag to drop for us to do the instant
We're gonna have to
replay,
start making a red flag.
Yeah, we are.
you know.
We have instant replay.
Not very instant, I'll tell you afterwards.
Yeah, it's time delayed instant.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Got this from Brother Rich. Prayer request. The mother of one of his co-workers, Sue West, has been diagnosed with leukemia and has begun chemo. The family requests prayers for healing from this cancer. So we want to pray for healing from the cancer. And Sister Judy Dukes, her test came back, 0 sign of the cancer. And Art was telling me that for where her immune system is now, her immune system is actually better now than before she ever got in the first place. So you know, we rejoice in that. We rejoice in that. What else do we have that we need to be mindful of?
Brian, unless you have something.
Yeah, brother.
I did talk to Johnny Webb again today. He told me that the hospice nurses are coming out regularly. But also, he unfortunately, he has a roommate who's found him on the floor a few times and couldn't get up. Another incident where someone came in and they found him on the floor. He's got pain medication to help with his pain, but he does have pain. He's asked for prayers. He said it's very tough, and I told him we would remember him in prayer.
Yes, sir. So do continue to keep Brother Johnny Webb in prayer. Ronnie and I did get to go out and visit Eileen, and I know a few others have been out there to help. She is home. She is doing better. Lee will be there for a little while yet, putting things in order. So, and you've been coordinating with Lee to help coordinate. So if you have some time that you might be able to go out and give a hand with something, shoot a message to Catherine, because she's kind of got Lee's kind of help list, and will be happy to help coordinate that however we need to. Yes. Catherine's mom is in the hospital, has had some spinal trauma from fall, and so she's asked for healing for that. My grandmother, she had a bad fall, and my aunt was telling me about that, and I'm trying to remember what my uncle has coming up for surgery. Yeah, no, that's Grandma and my uncle are more important in my head. Now I can't think of what my uncle's was, but so we've got that. What else do we have? Do we need? Well, yeah, okay. So Phyllis said Brian. All right. So remember Brother Brian in prayer with surgery tomorrow. So, all right. What else do we have? What else do we have? All right. Chris, we're at what? 7 or 8 baptisms in the last 9 baptisms since the first of the year.
Wow.
All right. So.
I also want to keep a brother in prayer. He's a member of the Pinellas Park congregation, but he's been down in prison for the last 20 years. And he's got some issues, but he's looking to get involved with some positive programs and things of that nature. So just want to keep him in prayer and that some doors be opened for him. I see him once a month in Hamilton, but we'd like to get something better going for him.
And I'll say this, vague enough so that shouldn't get you in trouble. A couple other gentlemen wanted to obey the gospel. Some things with the correction officer that he was ready for those couple guys to go back, that their baptisms had to be moved. So when you keep Chris and Gary in prayer, also remember the correction officers that work with them. That you know, when an inmate is ready to obey the gospel, that the heart of the correction officer would be in a place to help facilitate that as much as possible. You know, and that's, and don't anybody leave here, and I'm not saying anything bad about corrections officers, just sometimes officers have good days, sometimes officers have rough days, and sometimes those don't always agree with, you know, so pray for hearts all the way around when you're praying for Gary and Chris in the prisons. You know, I will say this, Greg, though the tide is shifting, the generation of females coming up is actually more visually stimulated than the males of their generation. The studies are showing. They are actually, we have now corrupted the society so much, the women that are coming up in the newest generation are actually more twisted than the men. So that's an interesting free tidbit, brother. You know, and that's and so what I would ask you is the Apostle Paul, when he writes to the Ephesians in Ephesians chapter 6, he asks them to pray always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, that he and the other workers of the gospel would have boldness. Always pray for your ministers, for your deacons, for your elders, to always have boldness to stand strong on all the points of the gospel. You say, even you, Brother Brian? Yeah, even me. Because like we talked over the last few weeks, and Rich and I were talking about Monday night, drift. You're holding the line, and you don't have to defend it for a while, and then the next time someone challenges it, you don't necessarily stand as bold as you used to, because you drifted in the society. And so always pray for your ministers, your teachers, your elders, your deacons, to always be bold in all things for the gospel. Because if the church isn't bold, why would we think the world will ever get their heads on straight? The church is the only light there is. Every other form of light is actually darkness. And so let us be bold, brothers and sisters, as we go back out into this week. Never apologize for anything in God's Word. Never apologize. God doesn't need you and I to say, I'm sorry that he said that. He doesn't need us to say that. He just needs us to say what he says and let it fall on souls' hearts where it may. And if you're here tonight, and maybe you've held back from obeying the gospel, maybe you know that you need to put Christ on in baptism, be united in his death, burial, and resurrection, but for whatever reason, you haven't wanted to do it, maybe because your friends have told you baptism is stupid or something, and you just don't want to go rock the boat with your friends. It's better to rock the boat with your friends in this life than when you get there, have him rock your boat and you miss out on eternal life.